The first people on New Yerevan saw the Khaari fleet as streaks of incandescence across the sky. By 8 p.m. local time, the colonists knew the streaks were not meteors. The incoming vessels decelerated in ways no natural object ever could, burning long scars of violet along the upper atmosphere before slipping neatly into geosynchronous positions. Sirens wailed across the settlement's domes. Windows darkened. Generators surged. On the edge of the colony plain, where the scrub grass gave way to a rocky escarpment, Captain Naeem Calder watched the lights through the viewports of the ESS Wayfarer. He stood at the center of his bridge, boots braced against the slight vibration of the ship's aging grav plates. Around him, the crew of the Wayfarer moved in a tense, efficient rhythm. They all knew their orders. Hold the line long enough for the evacuation shuttles to make it up from New Yerevan, then run for it if they could. Tracking 8 primary contacts, reported Commander Nicholas Ryback, eyes flickering over his tactical display. 3 cruisers, 1 carrier, rest escorts, all Khaari signatures, range closing. He did not say what all of them were thinking, that the Khaari had committed this much firepower to a relatively minor human colony meant they were sending a message. Naeem had seen Khaari ships before in classified footage. Sleek, dark hulls, grown rather than built, latticed with bioluminescent veins. Now, they glowed like deep-sea predators above a world that had only been settled for 20 years. He felt a flash of anger, bright and useless, and suppressed it. "Any response from them?" he asked. "Standard Dominion broadcast," said the comms officer. "Surrender and disarm. No negotiation. They claim legal mandate over this system as unstewarded resource space." Naeem exhaled through his nose. Legal. As if the presence of 20,000 souls, farming and building and raising children below, was a drafting error in a contract. "Then we do what we came to do," he said. "Bring us between them and the shuttles. Nicholas, plot us a course through that rock belt. I want as much debris between us and their beams as possible." Nicholas hesitated only a fraction of a second. "That's a tight squeeze, Captain. This ship was rated for asteroid prospecting before some bureaucrat repainted it as a cruiser," Naeem replied. "Let's remind everyone what she was built for." On the planet below, in the southern sector of New Yerevan's main dome, a different alarm sounded. It was accompanied by a smell, a sharp chemical tang that overrode the metallic dust smell of the recycling plant. Corporal Jalen Talalay pulled his rebreather down over his face an instant before the mist reached him. A red indicator flashed on the processing tank to his left, and he heard the crackle of an overloaded pressure valve. "Everybody back!" he shouted. The Terran waste recycling tank ruptured with a wet, hollow pop. A pressurized slurry splashed across the concrete, streaking up walls and over the bodies, snapping for cover. The Rangers of the 3rd Orbital Detachment had learned to move fast, and most of them got clear in time. The Khaari boarding party, charging through the opposite doorway, was not so lucky. A wave of opaque fluid hit them with surprising force. It turned the dark luster of their grown armor a greasy brown. One of the Khaari slipped, long limbs splaying. Another dropped a weapon and snarled. Their rebreathers fogged. To Jalen's left, a human engineer cursed. "You just soaked the waste tank," she said. "That's full of EBL-9. The name sparked immediate, if limited, understanding in Jalen's mind. EBL-9, the latest generation of Earth's industrial superbacteria, engineered to chew through dumb plastics, repair biopolymer cracks, and keep whole sections of the colony's infrastructure alive with minimal manual work. And now it coated Khaari armor, weapons, and the organic metal plates of their exoskeleton augmentations. Jalen did not have time to think much about the implications. The Khaari were momentarily blinded, and that was enough. "Now," he shouted, and the 3rd Orbital Rangers opened fire. Above, Naeem Calder's ship plunged into the debris field like a fish diving through reeds. Chunks of rock, ancient shards from the system's unruly asteroid belt, tumbled in lazy rotation. Sunlight turned their edges to bands of gold, while their shadows were knife black. The ESS Wayfarer's maneuvering thrusters flared in sharp bursts as Rachna Rao, down in engineering, diverted power from life support redundancies to the drives. "Ease off deck gravity another 2%, she told her team. fingers flying over hollow switches. I want those plates light enough that they don't shear if we have to yaw. Crew's going to notice, a tech muttered. They can complain when they're alive, Rachna said. On the bridge, the stars shifted as the ship wove through the rocks. Khaari beams lanced after them, blue-white spears that vaporized stone into expanding clouds of plasma. Keep the biggest slabs between us and them, Nicholas ordered, stabbing up vectors. Link our course to the shuttle transponders. If we can hide them in our wake, even better. Small icons on Naeem's display showed the evacuation shuttles rising from New Yerevan. Each was packed with scared colonists and whatever personal possessions they had grabbed in the 20 minutes since the sirens had started. Khaari targeting solutions swept for them, adjusting to the impossible trajectories the human vessels were pulling through the debris field. On the Dominion flagship Scourge of Emberwake, chitinous consoles flexed under the hands of its commander, Marshal Threxel. Threxel's spines quivered with irritation as he watched the human vessels dodge behind rock after rock. Their ships did not impress him. They were asymmetrical things of welded metal and patched composites, with visible seams, external conduit runs, and that faint, ugly glow of non-biological reactor cores. Yet they danced with an agility his order of battle projections had not predicted. These primitives behave like void lice, Threxel hissed to his staff, scrambling in cracks, thriving on debris. Increase beam power. If the rocks get in the way, then we burn the rocks. Compliance pulses ran through the command net. The Scourge's living reactor flexed, and its spinal weapon systems drank deep. New beams rode out, hotter and wider. Whole planetoids split and vaporized. But every time a fresh, incandescent cloud blossomed, the ESS Wayfarer slid somewhere impossibly narrow, thrusters flaring, and reappeared on the far side of the blast. Threxel's attention, fixed on those escape patterns, did not linger on the crates of recovered human equipment that had arrived in his science decks an hour earlier. They had been taken from the ground raid on New Yerevan. Odd metal boxes, dull tools, a few pieces of armor. Among them were several plates from the Rangers' suits, streaked with dried brown residue that none of the Khaari technicians had bothered to scan thoroughly. They had been set aside for later study, close by a trophy rack of captured human rifles. The rack's biometal rods had already begun to dull around the edges of the dried residue. For now, Threxel had more immediate prey in mind. Target their largest ship, he said, his eyes narrowing as the Wayfarer's icon flickered over his display. Crush it. The others will surrender once they see their champion burn. On the Wayfarer, the communications console chimed. Dominion broadcast repeating, the comms officer said. They're addressing us directly now, demanding surrender again. They claim to have the right of interdiction over sub-civilized forces. Nicholas snorted. Sub-civilized, but still a tactical problem. Naeem's jaw tightened. Mute them. Rachna, how much abuse can the new plating take? This was one of the few advantages they had. Hastily grown bio-composite hull segments, manufactured from Earth-derived designs that used living bacterial lattices to knit polymer and ceramic into high-strength, self-healing plates. Depends where they hit, Rachna replied over the intercom. We rushed those growth cycles. They'll soak 1, maybe 2 glancing shots. Anything more, and they'll crack like eggshells. But they'll slow particle penetration. That's the point. Naeem nodded once. All right then, he said. Let's make glancing shots and pray. They did. The first direct hit from the Khaari cruisers came as the last of New Yerevan's shuttles cleared the upper atmosphere. A beam grazed the Wayfarer's port bow, stripping away 3 layers of composite. The ship lurched, warning siren shrieking. Smoke curled up from a console, and someone cursed as they were thrown from their chair. Naeem tasted copper and bit down hard. Report. Hull breach in sections C9 through C12, someone called. Automatic seals holding. No decompressions. Composites took most of the punch, Rachna said, breathing hard. We're hurt, but not out. I told you those ugly plates would earn their keep. On the Scourge of Emberwake, Threxel saw the human ship reel and smiled a thin, serrated smile. Then something on his own bridge squealed an alarm. A maintenance supervisor flicked a sensory frond against a status panel. Commander, he said slowly, We are registering anomalous fractures in dorsal plating. Stress lines are propagating faster than predicted. Under fire? No, the supervisor said, confused. We have not been hit in that sector. It is spontaneous delamination. Threxel dismissed it with a wave. Production flaws. We rushed this offensive, and the shipwrights cut corners. Adjust internal bracing and keep firing. The supervisor obeyed, but his unease did not fade. Beyond the armored curves of the flagship, in the reaches of its hull away from direct supervision, faint spiderweb cracks were indeed spreading through its organic metal skin. In the micro-niches of those cracks pulsed the faintest shimmer of active metabolism that was not Khaari. It did not yet think. It did not need to. It fed. By midnight on Bastion Point, hundreds of light years away, Dr. Leora Benade had not slept in 30 hours. Her lab was a cramped wedge on a research outpost that clung to the edge of human-held space like lichen to stone. Displays flickered in muted colors around her. Sample tubes glowed in containment hoods. The room smelled of disinfectant and coffee. Priority packet coming in from New Yerevan Theater, announced the station's systems. Tagged, battle telemetry and hull sample data. Leora rubbed her forearms, trying to knead out the ache, and straightened. Root it here, she said. Projected data cascaded before her. Energy readings, hull stress logs from the ESS Palisade Dawn, sensor captures of an enemy flagship seemingly losing chunks of its own structure even as human ordnance struck. She frowned. Rewind that segment, she murmured. The sequence replayed. A Khaari ship, beams lancing out, its hull a seamless dark curve, until a patch of that darkness simply sloughed away, tumbling as molten slag into the void. No hit landed nearby. No external force obvious. Her mind, tuned to microbial timescales as much as strategic ones, leaped to an unwelcome association. No, that's absurd, she thought. EBL-9 is a waste recycler, not an acid. Yet she had seen what it did to human polymers laced with the right enzymes and catalyst fields. Materials that were supposed to last decades crumbled in hours if EBL-9 had been misapplied. Station, she said. What are the spectral traces in those hull fragments the Dawn transmitted? Analyzing, the system replied. Organic metallic matrix, typical of Dominion construction. Additional signature detected. Pattern matches. Earth-derived hyperplastic breakdown microbes of the EBL series. Variant unclassified. Leora stared at the numbers. Someone got the waste bacteria onto their hulls, she said softly. And it's eating them alive. She sagged back into her chair, mind racing. Whatever idiot had let that happen had changed the nature of the war, and no one had meant to. On the battered Wayfarer, wound one of many new scars throbbing along her flanks, Naeem Calder watched the Khaari fleet begin to pull back. Are they retreating? Nicholas asked, incredulous. Icons blinked on the tactical holo. Khaari cruisers adjusted vectors, pulling away from the worst of the asteroid debris. Their beams continued firing, but their formations loosened. They're not breaking, Naeem said. They're hesitating. Something's wrong on their side. He did not yet know about the hairline fractures lacing their hulls, or the way their internal conduits were beginning to pit where Khaari biometal met dried residues from contaminated trophies. All he knew was that New Yerevan shuttles were away, and they were alive. Signal the evacuation transports, he said. We're pulling them back to Bastion Point. Rachna, start planning how to keep this crate in one piece for the ride home. Yes, Captain, she said. And while I'm at it, I'll be writing a very passionate letter to the people who signed off on these plate growth cycles. The ship limped away under heavy thrust, every deck groaning and every system running hotter than it should. Naomi's crew moved through the cramped corridors with that peculiar mix of exhaustion and adrenaline that made jokes sharper and tempers shorter, and kept hands steady for just a few hours more. They had no idea that pieces of the Khaari flagship, unseen by anyone living, were tumbling in their wake, dissolving slowly into a haze of bacterial lace. In an observation lounge on Port Caduceus, the war was reduced to dancing glyphs and negotiated language. The independent station was thick with the smells of too many species, breathing too little recycled air. Light refracted off water tanks and polished shell. Traders moved through the concourse, their own wars consisting of nothing more lethal than carefully worded contracts. Envoy Carla Dufresne watched the feed from Human Fleet Command with her fingers drumming on the table. She saw the same footage Leora had. Khaari ships faltering, armor plates coming undone. She saw, too, the sensor data on something Earth-made, embedded in alien hulls. Across from her sat Yerevan Vest of the Solinari Concord, their translucent skin catching the station's stray light. Yerevan leaned forward, expression unreadable. "Your people appear to have surprised the Dominion," Yerevan said in their toneless voice. "Few have ever forced the Khaari to disengage a theater once they commit." "We forced nothing," Carla said, more sharply than she intended. "We survived by improvisation and luck." "Luck," Yerevan repeated. "Your luck appears to take a particular form. Dangerous microbes." Carla closed her eyes briefly. "We did not deploy a bioweapon." "I did not say you did," Yerevan replied. "But whatever is happening to their ships, it concerns more than just you. A galaxy with collapsing Khaari hulls is a different place than one without." On the Khaari core world of Zethrael, in a vaulted chamber pulsing with the slow heartbeat of the planet's grown infrastructure, Threxel stood before a holo-map of the front and ground his teeth. Engineers had stripped the Scourge's corrupted plates. They had found the enemy. The contaminant traces to Terran industrial tools, said Varesh Tuan, the researcher in charge of the investigation. His fronds smelt faintly of chemicals and long nights, specifically to an engineered microbe used in their waste management systems. Our analysis suggests it was not originally designed to attack us. "Originally?" Threxel asked. Varesh hesitated. "It has adapted. Our hull materials, our conduits, our reactor casings, all present as viable feedstock to it now. It thrives in the resonance fields we use for power transmission. This is not a passive nuisance. This is structural failure at the micro level, guided by evolution we do not control." Threxel curled his talons and flexed them. "Then we will control it." He turned to the chamber's assembled strategists and biotechnicians. "I propose, Purity Vesper," he said. "We design a counter-microbe or catalyst, something that sterilizes any environment touched by this Terran filth. Any human world, any ship, any object that has ever carried them must be purged. We cannot permit them to continue shipping their trash across the void." The War Council murmured agreement. Behind it, fear. Varesh said nothing. He thought of the way human waste microbes had eaten his sample plates in hours, reorganizing themselves into shimmering lattices that were almost beautiful. He also thought of the acceleration curves of evolutionary arms races, and wondered if throwing another uncontrolled biological agent into the mix was truly wise. On Bastion Point, Leora Benade's tired voice reached Naeem Calder over a secure channel. "You're certain it's EBL-9?" Naeem asked. "Yes," Leora said. "Variant strain, but the genetic backbone is ours. Engineered on Earth, refined at colonies like New Yerevan. In theory, it should only break down specified human polymers. In practice, it found new food. It found a banquet," she said. "Their hull composites are close enough to its target structures that all the lock and key systems we built are firing like overexcited sensors. It's eating and repairing as fast as it can. Their ships are rotting." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of ship systems. "This was never meant to leave planetary infrastructure," Naeem said. "We used it in sewage plants and recycler vats, and on bio-composite armor," Leora added. "Your new plates are laced with a cousin strain. Under our conditions, that's safe. Under theirs, not so much." Naeem thought of Jalen Talalay, whoever he'd had leading that ground fight, slipping in a brown slick of leaking waste fluid. No one had set out that morning intending to unleash a plague on the most feared empire in local space. "What are our options?" he asked. "Option 1, Leora said, ticking points off without warmth. "We do nothing. EBL-9 continues to spread through any Khaari system that's touched contaminated hulls, tools, or prisoners. They suffer catastrophic mechanical failure. Their empire crumbles. Collateral damage to neutral stations, and to us, is unknown. Their likely response will be to burn any human world they can still reach. Not acceptable, Naeem said quietly. Option 2, we try to weaponize it, Leora continued. Seed their shipyards and reactors with tailored strains, accelerating the process. While we build countermeasures for our own systems, we might end the war quickly. Or we might end a lot more than that if it jumps species and substrate boundaries we haven't even mapped. And option 3? Naeem asked, already suspecting. Containment, Leora said. We treat this as a biosafety disaster. Study it. Learn its parameters. Build deactivation protocols and sterilization methods that don't just drive it further into mutation. That will require cooperation from at least some non-human powers. And from the Khaari. Cooperation, Naeem repeated, tasting the word like something foreign. Beside him, Nicholas shifted but held his tongue. He knew his captain well enough to hear the layered tones, the soldier in Naeem who wanted to exploit any advantage, and the man in him who had seen enough unintentional tragedies on backwater worlds to be wary. Admiral Karasuma wants you back at Bastion Point as soon as your ship can limp home, Leora said. You, Rachna, your tactical recorders. He's talking about a program we're tentatively calling Hearthshield. The idea is to make sure this fire doesn't jump from our enemy's house to everyone else's. Naeem closed his eyes briefly, saw in his mind's eye the retreating Khaari fleet and the tumbling wreckage, the shuttles packed with families. I'll be there, he said. And Leora. Make sure everyone understands this. We did not start this war intending to fight it with microorganisms. I will not be the face of a species that shrugs and says, well, too bad the germs got loose. Leora nodded in her lab, though he could not see it. Understood, Captain, she said. That's exactly why I want you in the room. Hearthshield began as a handful of people in a dim conference chamber on Bastion Point. Naeem Calder, still smelling faintly of scorched metal and sealant despite a change of uniform. Leora Benade, hair uncombed, eyes dark with fatigue, a stack of data slates before her. Admiral Hitoshi Karasuma, his uniform immaculate, his presence heavy with the weight of decisions that could not be safely delayed. Carla Dufresne, representing the Diplomatic Corps, a handful of support staff from engineering and operations. On the hollow wall behind Karasuma, the same footage looped. Khaari hulls failing, EBL-9 signatures glowing in false color. We have, unintentionally, created a tool that can destabilize the entire region, Karasuma said. His voice was calm, but his hands were folded so tightly his knuckles paled. The Dominon is already terrified of it. They have begun a program they call Purity Vesper. Our intel suggests they intend to sterilize any space we have occupied. Sterilize how? Carla asked. We don't know yet, Karasuma admitted. But if their usual doctrine holds, it will be excessive. Leora spoke up. EBL-9 is not designed to be a weapon, but it is designed to adapt. Its whole purpose was to thrive in the harsh, variable conditions of waste processors and habitat maintenance systems. If the Khaari start throwing broad-spectrum sterilants and mutagenic radiation at anything they suspect is contaminated, they could drive it into forms we can't model. Meaning? Nicholas asked from where he sat along the wall, one of the few line officers invited. Meaning it might learn to eat more than just their hulls, Leora said. Meaning it might take a liking to human civilian infrastructure, or to Solunari constructs, or Dralkin scavenged Khaari tech. Meaning, if we let this run on autopilot, we might all be trying to build spacefaring civilizations while sitting on material that dissolves under our feet. Karasuma looked at Naeem. Your actions at New Yerevan kept those people alive, he said. Now I am asking whether you're willing to risk your ship and crew again, this time not to fire on enemies, but to help contain the consequences of what happened there. Naeem met his gaze. What exactly are you proposing, he asked. Karasuma brought up a map of Kesem 3, an unremarkable moon where intelligence had located a Khaari maintenance depot, and of the nearby Shroudfall Nebula. We believe the Khaari are routing contaminated equipment through this hub, Karasuma said. If we can seed that depot with controlled strains of EBL-9, plus timed deactivation enzymes we develop here, We might be able to do two things at once. Force them to recognize that we control the microbe's worst effects, and give ourselves a proving ground to refine containment methods. You would lead that operation. Naeem rubbed his brow.
So we are weaponizing it,
he said quietly.
But in a way we think we can undo.
Carla spoke then.
The Solinari have indicated they are concerned, she said.
Errol and Vest has informed me that their council is debating whether to intervene. They want assurances that we intend to manage this responsibility, not simply ride the wave. The Solinari will not do more than watch and prod, Karasuma said. They do not send fleets, they send observers. That may work to our advantage, if we show them we take this seriously. Naeem looked at Leora.
Can we do this without losing control? He asked. She did not answer immediately. She thought of petri dishes, of 10 generations of microbes racing through mutations in a day, of failures and near misses with earlier EBL versions.
We can try, she said at last. We can design deactivation enzymes that work on specific EBL9 conformations. We can set them up to trigger after a chosen metabolic cycle count, but there will always be variables. No biological system is perfectly predictable once you unleash it. Naeem thought of the faces in his crew. He thought of the weight of billions who had no idea that their waste processors might now be a theater of war. Then, we will treat this with the gravity it deserves, he said. We are not gods to reshape life and shrug. We are hairless primates who just figured out spitting distance in vacuum. We will err on the side of humility. Karasuma's expression softened by a degree. That is why I asked you, he said. Project Hearthshield is approved. Prepare your ship, Captain. And Leora, you're going with him. Of course, she said warily. I wouldn't miss it. Kesem 3 floated like a dull stone between the stars, ringed with the faint glitter of debris and docked constructs. The Khaari depot there was a tangle of grown and welded structures, less elegant than their core world bastions. Even empires cut corners at their frontiers. Storage pods drifted in loose formation, tethered by bio-cables and metal spars. Maintenance craft buzzed like insects. The ESS Wayfarer and ESS Palisade Dawn dropped out of faster than light a safe distance away, their drives leaving brief blue halos in the dark. Passive sensors only, Naeem ordered. We go in quiet until we can't. On the bridge, Jalen Tawale stood at a secondary console, helmet under his arm. His memories of EBL-9 were muted by the adrenaline fog of ground battle, but bits of that day on New Yerevan flickered. The feel of slick concrete beneath his boots, the smell of ruptured waste tanks, the way Khaari armor had looked when it was streaked with the stuff. Little did we know, he muttered. Little did you know you were baptizing the Dominion's fleet, Nicholas said dryly. Then, more seriously, don't blame yourself. If you hadn't made that mess, those Khaari would have carved through your squad. Jalen gave a tight nod. He understood. But in some quiet corner of his mind, he would always wonder whether he had been the first to spill the matchstick into the dry underbrush. In engineering, Rachna oversaw the launch of the micro-drones. They were palm-sized, their shells a patchwork of human alloys and biological scaffolds. Inside each, EBL-9 slept in a dormant matrix, interwoven with a carefully sequenced deactivation enzyme. Timers set. A tech reported. They'll wake up and start feeding when they sense Khaari hull fields. We have a window of about 3 hours after that before the enzymes activate and shut them down, provided no one bathes them in unknown catalysts, Rachna grunted. And if someone does, then we get surprises. We always do, she said. They released the drones. They drifted like dust motes, shimmering faintly as they unfolded thin, mica-like wings to catch stray charged particles. The Wayfarer's maneuvering jets gave them their initial vector, but from there they rode currents and field gradients invisible among the clutter of depot traffic. Khaari sensors, tuned to larger intrusions, ignored them. They settled on hull plates, on stored conduits, on reactor casings, awaiting installation on the Mall of Cindering Moons and its sister ships. They warmed slowly, reading the electromagnetic hum of their environment, and began to wake. The first warning that something had gone sideways came too soon.
Multiple Khaari drives incoming, Nicholas said, eyes narrowing. We must have tripped an outer perimeter sensor, or they were scheduled for resupply anyway. Icons bloomed on his screen. A patrol group, perhaps misaligned from its slot. Returning home early. Its transponders identified it as part of Marshal Threxel's wider command. Abort, Rachna asked over comms. Naeem weighed the growing risk. If we leave now, we lose this chance, he said. We also risk them tracing these drones back to us, without seeing their full effect, and starting to experiment with countermeasures out of sight. I'd rather see what happens where we at least have instruments watching. Then we run and watch from the nearest cover, Nicholas said. Shroudfall is right over there, Captain. Ugly, but forgiving of mistakes. Shroudfall Nebula filled a swath of the forward viewport as they turned toward it, a massive cloud of ionized gas and tangled magnetic fields. Lightning flickered silently through its denser regions. It was a place navigators cursed and smugglers loved. The Wayfarer and the Palisade Dawn accelerated, slipping toward the nebula's edge just as the Khaari patrol arrived at Kesem 3. Naeem watched as the Khaari ship's hulls glided past the depot, close enough for their environmental fields to tickle the waiting drones. In the depot, EBL-9, patient until then, tasted a familiar pattern, Khaari biometal, resonant with the same fields as the hull scraps collected from New Yerevan. It surged awake. It grew. Activation confirmed, Leora said tightly from her lab on the Wayfarer. We're seeing metabolic spikes consistent with EBL-9 going live on multiple depot structures. And the enzymes? Naeem asked. They're trailing, she said. We have about 2 hours before they start biting back. That's assuming no one does anything stupid. Someone did. Purity Vesper warheads were sleek pods the size of small fighters, their surfaces etched with Khaari biocircuitry. They carried, not explosive charges, but dense cores of catalytic agents and exotic radiation sources tuned to wreck the chemistry of most known microbial life. They had been designed in haste. Somehow, they had made it through Dominion approvals anyway. In the chaos that followed the first Khaari observation of their rotting hulls, orders had been broadcast. Deploy Purity Vesper in any region where Terran contamination was suspected. Kesem 3, with its knot of reused equipment from New Yerevan and other human contact points, was high on that list. Naeem and his crew saw the launches on long-range sensors. Bright streaks from the patrol group bursting toward the depot, then arcing inward as their guidance systems locked on. They're going to scrub the whole area, Nicholas said, horrified. Captain, when those pods hit our seeded materials, the mutation rate. I know, Leora said, her voice much too calm. I know. Naeem watched the simulation on his screen, as best as their instruments could model it. Purity Vesper's radiation, slamming into blooming EBL-9 colonies, breaking bonds, scrambling genes accelerating everything. He felt a sick twist in his gut. We have to get closer, Leora said abruptly. Naeem stared at her. Closer? He repeated. If we stay this far out, we will only see the aftermath, she said. If EBL-9 goes wild in new, unmanageable ways, we need real-time data to know how. Otherwise, we're flying blind. And if there's any chance our containment enzymes can still dampen the cascade. He hated that she was right. Rachna, he said, how much do you love flying through unstable plasmas? About as much as I love being eaten by bacteria, she replied. Which is to say, not at all. But I'll take the plasma, thanks. It's the danger I can see. They plunged into the outer skirts of Shroudfall, sensors struggling. Static filled the comm lines. Electrical discharges crackled along the Wayfarer's hull. Behind them, in cleaner space, uninvited witnesses gathered. The Corona Accord, its solinari contours gleaming faintly, had arrived tracking the same rumors of dissolving Khaari ships that echoed through trader channels. Aurelin Vest regarded the nebula's outer glow and the tracks of human and Khaari vessels disappearing within. Signal both parties, Aurelin told their staff. Inform them the Concord is present and will record what happens here. Perhaps that will encourage restraint. Nearby, in a battered frigate bristling with mismatched equipment, Grith Ordis watched as well. The Dralkin captain had acquired his share of scavenged Khaari hull plating over the years
installing it wherever his own ship's skin had failed. He had also lost one such plate, not long ago, when it had suddenly crumbled at the edges, flaking away like stale bread. He had not connected it to humans until he saw leaked footage of a Dominion flagship rotting from the inside. He smiled now, sharp and thoughtful. If the bugs that eat Khaari metal are human-made, he told his second, and if the humans are the only ones who know how to shut them off, then some people are going to pay a lot to either be on their good side or steal their secrets. His second shifted uneasily. And if the bugs don't stop where the Khaari begin, then we make sure we're not the ones closest to the feast, Grith said lightly, though a new wariness had taken root in him. Inside Shroudfall, visibility deteriorated as the nebula thickened. Lightning skated across the Wayfarer's hull. Systems flickered. Jalen floated in a zero-G section near one of the observation ports, staring into the churning glow. Even with the ship's grav plates dialed low for safety, he felt every jolt. "I've done drops into atmosphere while taking fire," he muttered to a fellow ranger. "But this feels like diving into the stomach of a storm that hates you." On the bridge, Naeem watched the telemetry of Purity Vesper pods reaching Kesem 3's depot. Contact. For an instant, nothing visible happened. Then the depot blossomed in eerie bioluminescent halos. Fragments of hull spat out waves of light as radiation tore through their infesting microbes. EBL-9 shuddered under the onslaught, its simple circuits recording damage and opportunities. In less than a second, it began to change. "Their sterilants are too broad-spectrum," Leora said, fingers racing over her console. "They're knocking out our designed safeguards and leaving the core replication machinery untouched. It's like they're amputating the parts that tell it when to stop." "Can our enzymes still touch it?" Naeem asked. "I don't know," she said. "We need samples." She looked up, eyes meeting his across the bridge. "I need someone to go get me pieces of what's happening out there," she said, "preferably without bringing them back smeared all over their suits." Jalen's stomach sank even before Naeem turned toward him. "You and your people started this," Nicholas said quietly. "It's fitting you help finish it." Jalen swallowed, then nodded. "Yes, sir," he said. "Rangers are ready." They suited up. The plan was simple and horrible. Use the Wayfarer's shuttles to make short hops in and out of the edge of the depot's debris cloud. Scoop up fragments with magnetic and biological filters, then return to a quarantine bay where Leora and her team could analyze them. Rachna recalibrated the ship's external fields to create buffer zones around the docking bays. "I'm turning this hull into a big petri dish," she grumbled, "and I hate that I understand why it's necessary." The first foray nearly failed. As Jalen's shuttle skimmed through the gleaming wreckage, particles pattered off the hull like sleet. Some fragments glowed faintly, tiny motes of mutated EBL-9 lattice that had fused with Khaari alloys. The shuttle's filters captured many, but not all. When the Rangers returned, floating into the quarantine bay, their suit exteriors were speckled with glassy deposits. Leora's instruments screamed. "Hold still," she ordered, more sharply than she intended. "Do not touch your helmets. Do not scratch anything. Move exactly as I say." They complied. It took 2 hours to peel the contaminated exteriors away, feeding them into sealed analyzers. Under the microscopes, something that was once EBL-9 shimmered and shifted, forming and reforming. "It's learning to stabilize in vacuum," Leora said. "It wasn't supposed to." "Is it still attracted only to Khaari materials?" Naeem asked. "For now." Leora hesitated. "But the more stress we put it under, the more likely it is to broaden its taste." He felt a cold weight in his chest. The war, which had always been about ships and beams and missiles, now had a front invisible to the naked eye, fought in generations per heartbeat. Outside, the Khaari were not idle. Marshal Threxel watched sensor data from Shroudfall with growing fury. EBL-9 mutations had turned the region around Kesem 3 into a minefield of semi-living debris. Several Khaari vessels attempting to retrieve assets had taken further damage as their hulls brushed contaminated fragments. When Solinari signals reached him calmly, worded requests from the Corona Accord to cease deployment of Purity Vesper until a joint solution could be found, he dismissed them. "They have not seen their ship bones turn to mush," he told his aides. "They sit in their crystalline towers and preach caution. Let them."
Varesh Toon, however, had seen the micrographs. He had watched EBL-9 eat through his lab-grown samples. He had seen the way Purity Vesper's radiation had removed the microbial breaks the Terrans had built in. He requested a private channel to the human ship Wayfarer. Protocol considered such an idea absurd. He did it anyway, routing through Solinari relays that took their own fee in observers. On the Wayfarer, Leora's console chimed. "Incoming transmission," she said, blinking. "Source: Dominion Science Network. Routed via Corona Accord encryption. They're asking for me by name." Naeem's eyebrows rose. "Answer them," he said. "On a separate, contained system. If this is a trick, I want it quarantined along with everything else." Varesh's image appeared as a hazy silhouette, Khaari physiology half obscured by deliberate fuzzing. "Dr. Benade," he said, voice translated into human speech with disconcerting smoothness. "I am Varesh Toon. I study the Terran contaminant. Microbe," Leora corrected automatically. "EBL-9. Your EBL-9, Varesh said, fronds twitching. "Your waste tool. We have nodded at its genius and cursed its arrogance. Purity Vesper was meant to be our answer. It is not. It has worsened matters." Leora's lips thinned. "I told my people that would happen, and I told mine," Varesh murmured. "They listened no more to me than yours did to you at first." Naeem watched their exchange, the strange mirror of cautionary voices in opposed militaries that had both been overruled. "What do you want, Varesh Toon?" Naeem asked, stepping into view. "I want this infestation contained," Varesh said simply. "I do not wish to preside over the dissolution of my civilization's tools because we failed to respect the resilience of tiny things from your world. I also suspect you do not wish to be remembered as the species that corrupted the void." He was right. "Then help us," Leora said. "Stop using Purity Vesper. It's driving evolution faster. Let us deploy our enzymes without your sterilants scrambling everything they try to bind." Varesh's fronds trembled. "You ask much," he said. "Our leadership sees your enzymes as leashes you hold on our throats. They will not easily agree to trust the hand that loosed the microbes in the first place." "Accidentally," Naeem said. "And we've been the ones throwing ships into their path to learn how to stop them. Look at the hull scars on the Wayfarer, Varesh. We are not hiding behind you while you bleed." Before Varesh could answer, new icons flashed on Niklas's console. "Captain," he said sharply, "we've got incoming. 6 Khaari signatures, vectoring not toward the depot, but toward us. They're deploying something." On the hollow, small, fast-moving objects detached from the Khaari vessels and angled for the Wayfarer's projected path. They were too small to be ships, too fast to be debris. Purity Vesper, version 2. Leora's stomach dropped. "They're trying again," she said. "Closer this time. Maybe they think if they trigger another cascade near us, they can claim we lost control and rally sentiment against us. They would risk another runaway mutation just for that?" Jalen asked, incredulous. "Yes," Varesh said quietly from the screen. "Marshal Threxel believes he can outblame you. He underestimates how fast these things change." Naeem's hands closed into fists. "You warned us," he said. "Will you warn him?" "I already did," Varesh replied. He did not listen. "So now I warn you. The new warheads were on an intercept course. If they impacted the contaminated debris cloud near the Wayfarer, the resulting interaction between altered EBL-9, Purity Vesper catalysts, and the human enzymes already dispersing there could produce anything." Naeem saw, in a single cold flash, the branching futures. In some, those interactions nudged EBL-9 into benign dormancy. Weather DP, end quote, end quote. Then were 7 city, then were 7, then were 7, end quote. In others, they taught it to live on any metal, any polymer, under any stars. "Options?" he demanded. "Run," Nicholas said. "We can turn away, regroup near Corona Accord. Let the warheads hit the contamination behind us. Maybe the patch of space that gets turned into a biological storm will be small." Leora shook her head. "Or we stay close," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. We intercept the warheads before they reach the densest clusters. If we can envelop them in concentrated enzyme fields at the moment of reaction, we might be able to force a particular outcome. That outcome being? Naeem asked. Dead slag, she said. Glass, inert, foam, no more replication. Or, he pushed, or we ignite precisely the chain reaction we fear most, she admitted. But if we back off and it happens anyway farther out, we'll have less control and fewer readings. At that point, we'll all just be praying. He felt the bridge crew's eyes on him, felt too the distant gaze of the Solunari on their observation decks, and the hungry curiosity of the Dralkin watching his moves. And behind them all, the billions who would never know his name, but would live with the consequences if he chose wrong. He thought of his parents, running a small orbital scrapyard around Earth before he ever saw a Khaari ship. He remembered the way they had treated rust, as an enemy and as a teacher. If you understood how it formed, you could build better against it. If you ignored it, your airlocks failed when you needed them most. He would not ignore this. We intercept, Naeem said. Rachna, can you configure our hull to serve as a reaction chamber? I want our enzyme reservoirs vented in a controlled field around those warheads at the moment they blow. Rachna's eyes widened, then narrowed with the sharp focus of someone presented with an impossible engineering puzzle. I can strip non-essential plating and rewire our external dispersal arrays, she said. We have plenty of enzymes loaded. But, Captain, we will be parking ourselves between a biological runaway and open space. If my calculations are off by a hair, we'll get eaten instead of the other way around. If someone has to be at that point, Naeem said, it should be the people who understand what they're holding. I won't ask Khaari crews to be our buffer for a mess we made. Leora looked at him, something like fierce pride twisting in her chest. You really are that stubborn, she said softly. He managed a thin smile. You really are that pessimistic, he countered. It balances.
To Varesh, still watching from his screen, Naeem said, If we succeed, you tell your superiors exactly what happened. You tell them we risked our ship to stop something that could have favored us in the long run. You tell them we are not only the people who create dangerous tools, but also the ones who strap ourselves to them to defuse them. Varesh bowed his head. If you survive, he said, I will. The Khaari warheads streaked closer, their trajectories arcing through bright turbulence. Threxel, from his distant command deck, saw the Wayfarer's icon shift to intercept and assumed panic. Good, he murmured. Let them be caught in their own fire. Rachna reconfigured the Wayfarer's field geometry until the ship's hull glowed a faint, ghostly color. Enzyme reservoirs vented through newly opened micro-nozzles, creating a thin mist around the ship, invisible save on specialized instruments. The Wayfarer became, in effect, a mobile, fragile bubble of precisely tuned biochemistry.
Everyone strap in, Nicholas said grimly. We're doing this the hard way. The first Purity Vesper warhead entered their enzyme field and blossomed open, releasing its core. Radiation flared, ions screaming. Normally, that cascade would have ripped indiscriminately through microbial genomes. Here, it met a storm of enzyme complexes keyed to EBL9's altered forms. For a second that seemed like an hour. Everything balanced on a knife edge. Then the enzymes grabbed the unraveling fragments of EBL9 like hands around spinning gears. Across the bow of the Wayfarer, space lit with faint, shifting auroras as wave after wave of reaction front-rolled. Where contaminated debris floated, it foamed. Where foam met catalyst, it hardened. Complex living lattices collapsed into lumpy, glassy conglomerates. Containment holding, Leora breathed, eyes wide. We're forcing it into inert chains. It's working. Then the second warhead hit. The ship shuddered. One of the external dispersal arrays overloaded and blew, venting atmosphere in a brief, bright plume. Compartment sealed. On deck spar D, a technician was flung against a bulkhead and did not get up. Alarms wailed. Rachna yelled orders into comms, overriding safeties to keep power to the remaining arrays. Jalen clung to a handhold in the corridor outside the quarantine bay. feeling the deck tilt as structural members groaned. "Hold together," Naeem whispered under his breath. To the ship, to his people, to the absurdly complex chain of events that had led to a human vessel intentionally diving into a bacterial storm. The third and fourth warheads detonated almost simultaneously. The Wayfarer's enzyme fields were ragged now, but they still caught most of the initial bursts. The reactions grew less coherent, more chaotic, but their net product continued to skew toward dead matter rather than living replication. Outside, observers watched in stunned silence. On the Corona Accord, Aralan Vest watched as the human ship's hull flared and dimmed as waves of inert foam drifted outward. The Solonari had seen many conflicts, had tallied many atrocities. They had not often seen a relatively small, underpowered vessel place itself deliberately in the center of a process that could very easily have erased it. "Transmit full record to Council," Aralan said quietly, "and suspend any motions for punitive sanctions. Whatever else these humans are, they are willing to bleed to prevent their tools from becoming indiscriminate weapons." On Grith Ordis's bridge, the Dralkin captain leaned forward, intrigued and unsettled. He had half expected the humans to flee and let the Khaari burn. Yet here they were, wrecking their own flagship to stop a sickness that was mostly eating their enemy. His second looked at him. "Still think it's wise to steal from them?" she asked. Grith studied the wounded Wayfarer, then the inert chunks of glassy foam slowly spinning where a ravenous microbe had raged minutes before. "I think," he said slowly, "that anyone who does had better be ready to match this kind of madness when their toys misbehave." Within the Wayfarer, air growled back into stabilizing ducts. Fires flickered and died under automated suppressant foam. The deck plating creaked. "Status?" Naeem called. "Major hull breaches in sections B and E," Rachna replied. "We've lost external plating in several arcs, but the core is intact. Drives are functional at reduced output. Life support is breathing heavily, but alive." Leora checked her instruments. "The region around Kesem 3 is mostly filled with inert complexes now," she said. "We've driven the majority of EBL9 and Purity Vesper residues into glassy aggregates. There are still pockets of active material, but their replication rates are orders of magnitude lower. We can handle those with more conventional cleanup." Naeem leaned on the back of his chair, suddenly very aware of how tired he was. "Casualties?" he asked softly. Reports trickled in. There were injuries. There were deaths. Each name carved itself into him. He accepted them, one by one, and set them alongside the uncountable numbers of lives that might have been lost if he had chosen otherwise. Carla's face appeared on a secondary screen, patched in from Port Caduceus, where she had been in frantic contact with Solinari and neutral representatives throughout the crisis. "They saw it," she said without preamble. "Everyone saw what you did. The Accord is already reframing its debates. The narrative now is that humans stepped into the blast to keep a mistake from becoming a catastrophe. That matters." Naeem did not care much, in that moment, about narratives. He cared that his ship, scarred and limping, still held an atmosphere. He cared that the microbe from Earth, which had seemed poised to become a myth of terror in a dozen languages, now drifted mostly as lifeless glass. But he understood that stories, too, were weapons and shields. "Tell them," he said, "that we will share what we've learned. Not freely, we still need leverage, and safeguards, but openly enough that no one has to guess how to stop this if it ever wakes again." Above Zethrael, Marshal Threxel watched the feeds with a snarl that slowly died into a grim, grudging acknowledgement. The human ship had survived. The microbe storm around Kesem 3 had abated. More important, the humans had been the ones to bend it toward that outcome, at great risk to themselves. His advisors whispered of recalculated threat matrices, where once the Dominion had ranked human danger in terms of missile yields and ship tonnage, now they began to include something else. An unpredictability rooted not in reckless aggression, but in a willingness to harness and then restrain the wild processes of life itself. Threxel's pride burned. But beneath that, something more pragmatic spoke. "We will sign their temporary accord," he said at last. "We will agree to halt Purity Vesper deployments in the contested zones. Let them do their cleanup. But we will not forget this day. Varesh Tuan listened, relieved that Purity Vesper launches would pause, troubled by the undercurrent of vengeance in his commander's tone. He thought of the human captain who had turned his ship into a shield, and of the human scientist whose frustration with short-sighted militaries had echoed his own. He wondered, for the first time, whether the future of interstellar conflict would be decided less by who built the largest weapons and more by who best understood the smallest engines of change. Months later, space around Shroudfall, Nebula, and Kesem, 3 still glittered with strange wreckage, now mostly inert, foamed glass structures, and fused alloy lattice conglomerates that drifted like the bones of some ancient creature. Cleanup crews from multiple species worked there, following protocols derived from Hearthshield. Khaari technicians donned suits lined with human-engineered bacterial filters. Solunari drones sprayed deactivation mists keyed to EBL-9's few surviving strains. Dralkin scavengers, under strict monitoring, hauled away safe scrap. At Bastion Point, in a lab that had once felt too small and now seemed the quiet center of a very large storm, Leora showed Naeem a data display. "We're seeing remnants of EBL-9 inches, some of the inert foam," she said. "Genetic fragments. It can't replicate in its current state. It's effectively dead, but pieces of its code have integrated with Khaari industrial microbes in controlled conditions." She tapped a control. A projection bloomed of a test bed where a new microbial lattice was knitting human and Khaari materials together into novel composites, stronger than either alone. "If we manage it carefully," she said, "this could become the basis for shared infrastructure. Ship hulls co-designed across species, structures that resist both rust and hunger." Naeem studied the simulation, then the woman beside him. "And if we do not manage it carefully, then we get another Shroudfall," she said. He thought of the Wayfarer, still in dock, her wounds half-healed, scars visible like medals. He thought of Jalen, who had gone back planet-side, with new caution around every waste tank he saw. He thought of the Khaari crews who had watched their indomitable warships fall apart under invisible assault. "We'll manage it carefully," he said. On Port Caduceus, Carla Dufresne shook hands, metaphorically and literally, with Erlen Vest. "The Accord of Bastion Point is in effect," Erlen said. "Neutral observers will monitor both your use of EBL-class microbes and the Dominion's suspension of Purity Vesper. You have achieved something rare. A ceasefire born not of exhaustion, but of shared fear. Fear can be a good teacher," Carla said, "as long as it doesn't make us stupid." Erlen's translucent mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "Your species appears uniquely inclined to dance on that boundary," they said. "Let us hope you keep your footing." In a dim, cluttered cabin aboard his patched-together ship, Grith Ordis turned a small shard of glassy foam over in his hand. It had been sterilized 3 times and scanned 100. It was, by every instrument he trusted, as dead as a stone. He still felt a prickle of unease each time he touched it. "Worth it?" his second asked from the doorway. Grith shrugged, eyes on the frozen whorls inside the shard. "That depends," he said. "If this is the last echo of the thing that made Khaari hulls crumble, then it's a souvenir of when the giants learned to be afraid of the folk from that little blue world. If it wakes up again." He set the shard down with more care than he would ever admit in a sealed box. "Then we'll see whether anyone else is willing to throw themselves into the storm the way they did," he finished. Far from all of them, orbiting the world that had birthed both the bacteria and the people who had nearly lost control of it, Earth's lights twinkled against the dark. In orbit, in shipyards hastily upgraded with Hearthshield protocols, engineers grew new hull plates with woven-in safeguards and kill switches. In laboratories, in cities, and on moons, microbiologists argued about ethics with military planners. Children learned in school that sometimes the most dangerous things their species made were not guns or ships, but the tiny tools that cleaned their water and ate their trash. Humanity's reputation across known space had shifted. They were still seen as reckless, aggressive, disturbingly comfortable with improvisation. But now, they were also known as the people whose everyday microbes could quietly undo an empire's war machines, and who, when that danger became clear, had steered their own flagship into the heart of the crisis to keep it from consuming everyone. It was a messy, contradictory legacy, as untidy as the planet that had produced them. And as long as ships like the ESS Wayfarer flew, scarred and stubborn, it would be a legacy the galaxy would not soon forget.